today what I want to talk about is the discourse. The discourse in SEO fandom is really heating up right now, y'all. And what I'm seeing people talking about a lot tends to converge on two main axes of conversation. The first is the classic topic that SEOs love to fight about. Should we be chasing the algorithm? That is it worth our time to take a look at what Google is doing when they post updates to the algorithm and try to reverse engineer that? Or should we be spending that same time just connecting with our users and focusing on them? The other thing that people are talking about a lot lately, and being mean to each other about, by the way, is Google's quality rater guidelines. For those of you who don't know, these are the set of guidelines that Google provides to the people who, in essence, beta test the algorithm. Representatives of Google have said that these are worthwhile for webmasters to pay attention to as well. A lot of SEOs think that that's smoke and mirrors on Google's part. There's a lot of conversation. And there are a lot of smart people who I respect a ton on both sides of these conversations saying really smart things. If you see your words up here, I promise I'm not trying to call you out. I'm just saying, people are talking about this a lot, and I don't find it particularly interesting to listen to. I get it. SEOs are busy. Like, this is a room of extremely busy people. And that means that our time is at a premium. When you see somebody giving SEO advice that you think is wrong or a waste of time or not where people should be focusing their efforts, that can hurt, right? It's frustrating to see busy people being given advice that wastes their time. I get that. And people who are in the don't chase the algorithm camp tend to focus on real company stuff. Real company stuff is a concept that Will Reynolds introduced at Mozcon 2012, 7 years ago, for those of you who would like to join me in feeling old. And it's the idea that instead of focusing on things like making tweaks to our title tags and our anchor text and things like that, we should be focused on marketing. We should be focused on stuff that real companies do, on building a great product and finding our audience and connecting with them where they live. And I don't disagree with any of that. Real company stuff, SEO is a marketing channel. We should be focusing on marketing. I don't disagree. But it's also entirely possible to do real company, great, beautiful, big marketing in ways that don't create SEO success. We've all been there. And real company stuff is not an excuse not to learn SEO fundamentals, not to focus on technical SEO. If we only focus on the user and don't think about the algorithm or Google at all, we are leaving opportunity on the table and we're not doing our jobs. It's both, right? It has to be both in order to succeed. So my personal framework for approaching changes in our industry, how I decide where to spend my time, is to view what we do. We are humans, right? Everyone in this room is human, right? And we are marketing to humans, right? Human people are the people who give us money in exchange for goods and services. We're humans marketing to humans, and we are doing so with a machine as the intermediary. It goes from humans through the machine and back to humans. Now, people in the real company stuff camp often talk about just create good content. Who here has been told just to create good content? Yeah. How do you know what good content is, though? How do you know what people want so you can give them to them? You figure out what information people need to complete their task, and you provide it. How do you get that information? Well, if you have a ton of money, you can do user testing and focus groups and bring your users all in together and ask them. It's very expensive. It's very time-consuming. The data is often not a representative sample. And if you work in an agency, you may not have access to your clients' clients at all. Well, you know who has more information about how people use search to find information than anyone? Google. Rand just talked about this. Google also has more information than anyone about how people talk about things, entities, topics, how those things are related using written language. They spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money trying to figure this out. At the end of the day, Google wants humans to find what they're looking for on Google, because that's how Google makes money. It's not altruistic, that's how they make money. This means that Google spends a lot of time trying to build machines that understand and can mimic the way a person might search for information. So, great. what do we mean when we talk about Google? Who is Google? Well, Google is two things. Google is a lot more than two things, but for the purposes of this conversation, Google is two things. Google is a company. Google has humans that work there. Danny Sullivan and John Miller and Gary Illish and everybody else, the thousands and thousands of people that work at Google. They're humans who are making decisions and communicating those decisions about the company. But when we talk about Google, we're often talking about the algorithm, the machine. And when I say the algorithm, it's a lot of different algorithms running consecutively and concurrently and on top of each other, and which one runs depends on the query. It's a series of algorithms. For the purposes of our conversation today, I'm going to alternately refer to as a machine or a robot. But it is Google the machine. At its very, very, very simplest, an algorithm takes in information, inputs, does something to them, processes them, and produces some kind of output that's like a very, 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 very simplified version of what an algorithm does. As SEOs, we tend to focus on algorithmic inputs because that's what we can control. Things like keywords, things like links, things like metadata. These are algorithmic inputs. They're what some people call ranking factors. They're the inputs to the algorithm that help Google decide what to output, and that output is the search engine results page. And often, we tend to stop there. We tend to look at the SERP and say, did I or did I not successfully optimize these inputs for the desired output? But that's not how Google thinks about the algorithm. Google, the company, is focused on results. Again, they want people to find what they're looking for when they search because that's how Google makes money. And the SERP is only a means to that end. And we've seen over and over and over again, Google is willing to completely blow up the SERP if it means that they can make more money and if more people can find what they're looking for on Google using Google. So we should be looking at outputs, not as ends in and of themselves, but as information about how to achieve those results. Because I also want people to find what they're looking for, and I want them to find it on my client sites and give them money so that they can give me money. Right? This is a job. We do this for work. It's fun, but they pay us. One way to understand Google is to try to understand what the human-readable quality signals that Google, using its huge, huge body of user data, has deduced are important to people when they search on a given topic. And then from there, to try to reverse engineer machine-readable equivalents or proxies of these signals. So it's not just the algorithm, it's not just humans, you focus on both. So the question that I ask myself with every SEO task is, how can I demonstrate quality in ways that are both human and machine readable? This is important because humans and robots don't think about things the same way, which is great because the human brain is very inefficient. It's beautiful and it's amazing and we can process a lot of information. But like the 12 people who thought they were listening to everything I said until just now, when they realized they were actually thinking about something else, the human brain can be very inefficient. Robots are never going to process information the same way humans do, and that's okay. So when you think about looking at a web page, a human might ask, what is this page about? And you just read it, and then you know what it's about. And you've read things, right? With a robot, what is this page is about is one of the easiest things that they can tell. And this is when we get into like our very old school on-page SEO signals, things like keywords, things like topic modeling, things like TF-IDF, which is like a very simple old school machine learning way of trying to understand the topic of a page. I'm not going to talk a ton about that because I think most people in this room have some understanding of it. If you do want to learn more about on-page SEO, Brittany had a really great Whiteboard Friday about it earlier this year that I suggest you check out. What I think is a more interesting question, both as an SEO and in trying to understand Google, is this a good page about this topic? Now, we've all encountered a web page where we go and we read it and we're like, this doesn't help me. It's vague, it's broad, it's a sales pitch in disguise. It doesn't have the information I need. I hate it. How do machines discover the same thing? How can they tell if something's good? They look at link signals, more on that later. But increasingly, Google is investing in things like natural language processing and neural mapping. They're trying to get more and more sophisticated about understanding what topics should be covered on a good page on a subject and how closely related to that good page any given piece of content is. So the example that Danny gave on Twitter was the soap opera effect. If you don't know what the soap opera effect is, you can't Google it, but you still might be experiencing it. So you might search something like, why does my TV look strange? Using things like neural matching and natural language processing, Google can start to understand that when somebody searches, why does my TV look strange, one possible answer is that it's the soap opera effect. I really enjoy trying to think about ways that a machine can find and parse information in content, both because it's important to understand whether or not Google's picking up what you're putting down, but also because humans are actually terrible at writing content that's about what they actually think it's about. You see this a lot in the B2B world, where you encounter this page that just has this wall of text and it's jargon and it's meaningless and you don't understand it at all. So this is a page from a very large software company that has a CRM solution. It ranks on page 2 for customer relationship management. And the only reason it ranks on page 2 is because they have a lot of authority. I find that optimizing for machine readability, because even though they're getting more sophisticated about it all the time, Google's still not quite as good as a person at figuring out whether or not a page is a good page about this topic. But optimizing for machine readability and optimizing for human readability actually have a lot in common. If you've ever been completely humbled by the readability score in Yoast, like, no one knows what you're talking about, you esoteric weirdo, break it down. Optimizing for human readability and machine readability can be the same. Machine-readable content is clear. It's concise. It puts answers next to question. It doesn't ramble on for 500 words before it gets to the recipe. It avoids jargon, and it covers enough of the related topics to give you a full picture of that topic. Does that sound like good writing? Yes, it does. It's human-readable, and it's also machine-readable. This is the kind of thing that we can do and optimize for both humans and machines at the same time. Google actually now has a natural language API. It's not as sophisticated as what they're using for their own stuff, but you can take a look at it and you can paste in a block of text and it will extract what entities it can find from the text, and then it will assign each one a salience score between 0 and 1. So 0.9 is great, 0.01 is not at all relevant. So what that score is how relevant is this entity to the piece of content as a whole? In other words, can this API understand what this content is about? So I pasted the text from this CRM page into this API, and look, it can tell that this is a page about a customer relationship management tool, kind of. It can tell that this is the top entity on the page, but even that is still only given a salience of 0.16, which means we're pretty sure this is what this page is about, but we're not that sure, which is probably why it ranks 19th. This is the kind of thing that you can look at and make sure that you're actually writing about what you think you're writing about. That you're not writing a post on social media for the holidays where you talk about the holidays for 1 paragraph and then your tool for 7 paragraphs and you never mention the holidays again. Why, yes, that is an example from real life. If you want to learn more about on-page SEO for natural language processing, Justin Briggs has an amazing resource on it. Get better at reducing the semantic distance between the related entities that you're talking about in your content, and you'll also be writing better content. All right, next question someone might ask themselves. Can this site be trusted? Rand just talked about that a lot. One of the ways that the machine can tell whether or not a site can be trusted is they look at things like link signals. And I find link signals fascinating because this is an area where the machine has been trying to mimic humans for years. How do humans figure out, using social information, if we don't already know, how would you figure out whether or not a person or a piece of content was trustworthy? You might ask around. If you ask around, if lots of people say it's good, that's better than if one person says it's good. If all those people are connected, you might trust that less than if a bunch of discrete random strangers say it. And if somebody who has expertise on that subject says it's good, you're going to count that more than if some rando says it. That's link signals. Those are the kinds of link signals that we look at. It's been years and years since sheer link volume was going to do anything for you. Think about how you as a person might figure out whether or not a piece of content or a website was trustworthy and seed that on the web in machine-readable ways. Cyrus just wrote a really great post about this that I had to redo my slide to fit in here because it was so good, that has a bunch of great graphics on how search engines value links. So check that out. And then lastly, a person might ask, is this site pleasant to use? Because even if it has what I need, if I hate your website, I'm not coming back. And this is where we get into modern web page optimization metrics, things like page speed, things like crawlability, things like information architecture, engagement metrics, things like that. What I love about web performance optimization is that at this point, the signals for the machine and the human are the same signals. This is the whole reason Lighthouse was released, right? Because for a human, your experience of a page doesn't begin once the page is fully loaded. It begins as soon as you start trying to load the page, which is why we now look at metrics like time to interactive and first meaningful paint. What is it like for a human to load this web page? You can optimize these machine-readable proxies and create a better experience for humans at the same time. Now, Lighthouse reports are difficult to run at any kind of scale. Real smart guy at Upbuild named James McNulty wrote a blog post and a tool about this. So if you want to run Lighthouse reports for multiple pages at once, we've got a tool. He's updating the tool sometime in the next few weeks, so keep an eye out. But it is possible to do. All right. So now we're all on the same page about what we as SEOs are trying to do. Let's go back to those two topics of conversation that SEOs won't stop fighting about. The quality rater guidelines are written by humans for humans. They have nothing to do with the algorithm. They are written by humans at Google for humans testing Google so that those humans can look at the signals that are being sent by the algorithm and see if they're satisfactory. They don't give insight into the algorithm, but they do give insight into what Google wants search to be, and I think they're useful through that lens. It's important to remember that quality rater data is probably being used in two different ways. It's definitely being used, as I said before, to essentially beta test the algorithm. When people search, do they find what they want? How do we know? Is this working, or is bad stuff coming up? But the other way that Google is almost certainly using this data is as a training set for machine learning. So every time a page gets rated high quality, needs fully met by a quality rater, it's extremely likely that Google is adding that to a training set for machine learning so that it can find similar pages. So in that sense, creating high quality needs fully met pages is, again, important for the machine and important for humans. Now, Google's pretty upfront about how the quality rater guidelines are not about how Google is now. It's not about the search engine today. And that's really important to keep in mind because it means that some things that you might try to optimize might not be effective yet. The guidelines don't tell you how it's ranking results. The guidelines tell you what the algorithm should be doing. They're where they're going. This is great because the future exists and we all want to be there. The big topic that's come out of the quality rater guidelines recently is expertise, authority, and trust, EAT. This is a new concept introduced in, I think, the second or third now most recent version of the quality rater guidelines. It's all about some of that stuff that Rand was talking about earlier. Can this information be trusted? Is it misleading? Is it harmful? And as soon as it came out, we had a whole flurry of conversation and topics and content created in our industry about EAT. Is it important? Should you be focusing on it? Does it have anything to do with rankings at all? And one question that I see Danny and Gary and John being asked a lot online that they seem pretty irritated by, and I get why, is EAT a ranking factor? EAT is not a ranking factor for the same reason that brand is not a ranking factor. Because any brand marketer will tell you brand isn't one thing. Expertise, authoritativeness, and trust are not individual things. You can't be like, how expert is this content? 7. Excellent. I have no follow-up questions. That's not how anybody finds information. So EAT is not a ranking factor because EAT is made up of dozens and maybe even hundreds of different signals, some of which may or may not be, at any given time, algorithmic inputs, which is what people mean when they say ranking factors. I don't care That's boring. Stop asking about it. Sorry, you guys are great, but can we stop talking about this, please? EAT has nothing to do with ranking factors because EAT is a system written by humans for humans. It is meant to be human readable. The signals that are outlined in the quality rater guidelines are human readable. It is a human readable way of answering the question of, does this person, does this website know what they're talking about? That doesn't mean, in fact, quite the opposite. It doesn't mean that Google isn't trying to answer these questions in the same way. It just means that we as humans aren't going to approach this in exactly the same manner. So again, we've got human readable signals, but that doesn't mean that Google isn't looking at their machine readable equivalents. In that sense, yes, again, EAT, like brand, very important, made up of dozens and maybe even hundreds of signals that you should be paying attention to and trying to optimize. I'm not going to go into how because Marie's going to talk about this tomorrow afternoon and she's super smart and you should all listen to her. But the question I ask myself when I read the quality rater guidelines is, which of these signals is machine readable? That's really interesting. Just go through the quality rater guidelines and read them and look at what of these things are things a machine could easily find. For example, under the EAT section, the quality rater guidelines talk about how content should be produced by people, medical content should be produced by people with appropriate medical expertise or accreditation. I know how I, a person, would figure out whether or not somebody was trustworthy. I wouldn't do it on their website, I would research it on the web. I know how I would do that. How might Google do the same thing? Where might they look for that information in places that I can put it? It's time to get experts to create your expert content. It's time, I know there are a lot of people who are beautiful content creators in this room, but when it's something that requires subject matter expertise, it's time to pony up and pay them. Expert content costs more. Somewhere along the way, a lot of companies appear to have decided that content should be cheap, which sucks. I feel you on that. It's time for people to start paying more to have content created by people who know what they're talking about. And once you have those subject matter experts creating content for you, you can promote them online the same way you would any other brand asset. A lot of the other stuff in the EAT stuff is already very easily machine readable. All of this stuff that I've highlighted here is stuff a machine can find on the page without trying. So are you putting it on the page or what? The other question that's important to ask is, how might a machine find the same information in another way? I know Cyrus Shepard is an SEO expert because I've known him for years. He was my boss for like a minute, and every time I talk to him, I'm like, wow, this guy is smart. But Google doesn't know Cyrus. It can't because it's a machine. Machines don't know people. So where online might Google find that same information that I know just from talking to him? Once you've thought about that, the next question to ask is, which of these signals can we boost? What can we make easier for a machine to find and read? Did you know that the quality rater guidelines contain step-by-step instructions for a simple link reputation audit? Just check it out. Section 2.6.4, it tells you exactly how to check the online reputation of any website. Is Google looking for this information the same way? Probably not, but I don't care because I'm a person. I can use this. I can find where online people are saying things about me, and I can work to optimize those signals, and then Google can find them. And then the last question to ask to keep yourself in context as you're reading these guidelines is, which of these signals is easiest to game or fake, and therefore less valuable? Because some marketers are terrible, ruin everything, try to game the system, so the challenge for search engines becomes creating a sophisticated enough set of inputs to separate the wheat from the chaff. This is why things like anchor text are now really only important in conjunction with a lot of other quality signals, because it's too easy to game. So take a look at the quality rater guidelines. Ask yourself, what of this information that is written by humans for humans could be found by a machine in another way? If you don't feel like reading them, I suggest following Jen Slag on Twitter because she also already does an amazing, thorough takedown every time they update the results. Okay, so that's the quality rater guidelines. Now, the $64 million question. Should SEOs chase the algorithm? Chase the algorithm too hard, the algorithm's gonna end up chasing you. If you are looking at algorithmic updates In order to find insight on algorithmic inputs, you are focusing on the wrong information. And you will always be behind the 8 ball because you will always be optimizing to what Google just did instead of what Google is going for. We should be instead examining for outcomes. How can we demonstrate quality in ways that machines and humans can understand? You can't be solely reactive to algorithmic changes. You will lose your mind. But when they happen, it's worth trying to understand not the what of what happened, but the why it happened. Ask yourself, what can this tell me about changes in my target market? With that in mind, here's some things that I like to look at in the wake of an algorithmic update. First of all, Google updates the algorithm every day, multiple times a day. A lot of times it's stuff we don't even notice. It's small, it's behind the scenes. Maybe it only affects one very niche industry, which is fine, unless it's your industry, and now suddenly you've got a 0-click result, like Rand was just talking about, where before you were getting in a bunch of traffic, then it matters a lot. And it doesn't really matter if it was a core update or if it just affected your industry, you're gonna care. So the first question then becomes, how, if at all, did this impact the sites that I work on? You can see here, Upbuild has a brand new client. You can tell they're brand new because we haven't even named their analytics stuff, the things that we like to name it. They were hit by the June update because they're a medical adjacent site. I care about that. I don't care if you guys care about it or not. I care about that. That's my job. So if you have a site that was hit, the next question is, was it page specific or was it site-wide? If you got hit in a way that, Merkala.com got hit, where like, you're just gone, you're donezo, you're out of the results, chances are it's either that you have been providing something of low quality that Google is actively trying to filter out, or you've been doing something that was working really well that Google has decided is too gameable a signal and doesn't work. A lot of times when this happens, you know what you did. So fix it. You can also check things like Twitter, SEO Twitter, forums, groups, like ask other SEOs. What did other sites that were impacted see? But a lot of times you've just lost some really great rankings on some very important high traffic topics. The thing is, you didn't lose those rankings. Somebody else got them. You got beat. So what does the SERP say? Who's ranking now? What does that mean for you? It's not always possible to get traffic back that you've lost. Sometimes that traffic is gone. Breathe, it's okay. You can get other traffic instead, but that traffic is gone. Sometimes it's not that you've been penalized or that something you were doing stopped working. Sometimes it's just that over time, what people want when they search in a topic changes, and you no longer have what Google, using this huge amount of user data, has determined people want. John Mueller just said the same thing in a Webmaster Hangout almost exactly a month ago. Search evolves. The SERP evolves with it. So understanding the end goal, again, the why, not the what, can give you insight into changes in your target market. What do these changes say about what my customers are looking for? What do they want that I don't have? And how can I provide these things for my users in a way that Google can see and understand? Again, this is very difficult to do at scale. I know Content Harmony has a tool in beta right now that analyzes SERPs for search intent. Rory Truesdale also wrote a great post on Search Engine Journal a few months ago about scraping the SERPs to optimize for search intent. Google doesn't like it when you scrape the SERPs, but whatever. The other thing to keep in mind is that if an update has happened within your niche that is meant to fix a flaw, that is meant to improve results quality, it will almost certainly not be the last time this update is made. Google will continue iterating until it fixes the problem. Think about Panda. Panda didn't just happen one time. It happened, and it kept happening, and it kept happening until finally they were able to build it in, and now it just is part of the algorithm. This is the kind of thing that you need to think about. If you had a healthcare-focused site that in March was not impacted by the core update, it would be the height of hubris to assume that you are safe forever. If an update hits your industry, hits your niche, hits your market, assume that it will happen again and again, and start ramping up your quality signals, because a lot of people who didn't get hit in March got hit in June. And I bet they wish that they hadn't just sat on their laurels. So when you're asking, does Google look at whatever thing as a ranking factor, as an algorithmic input? I mean, you can get so minute, you can get so far down the rabbit hole. Or you can think about, okay, if it is a machine-readable proxy to a human-readable quality signal, they're probably at least trying to look at it, and since it's also a human-readable quality signal, you might as well optimize for it. If it's very easy to do, it's very easy for you to do, it's probably easy for everybody else to do too, which means it's easy to game. That might mean that either they've decided it's not a valuable signal, or they're still working on how to interpret it in such a way that it's less gameable. And when you're asking about things like organic click-through rate, dwell time, engagement metrics, we talk about this stuff a lot. By my model, I would say Google has almost certainly at least tried to look at this stuff because it makes sense. It's machine readable, it's a human quality signal, there's no reason for them not to. I don't know this, I just assume it. But you should want that stuff anyway. So why not optimize for it? Worst case scenario, you've made a better website that humans really like. I don't see the downside. So yeah, final thought. Optimizing for the robot, too reactive. Optimizing just for the human, inefficient. You have to look at both. You have to look at what people want and how Google can figure that out and create that together in order to stay ahead of changes in the algorithm. And there are people in this room who are like, yeah, I know all this. I know all this. This is not helpful for me. If you know all this, what are you doing about it? I have homework. Yes, I know it's the morning on day one. I have homework. Go back and reread the quality rater guidelines. Highlight the parts that you find interesting. What if these signals are machine readable? Can you optimize them? Ask yourself, be honest. Ask yourself, what is your site currently benefiting from that Google's likely to either be trying to discount or filter out? Right, better content, right? And by better, I don't mean longer. I mean clearer, simpler, more machine-readable content. Think about the entities that you are talking about in your content and try to improve the semantic relationships between them. One way to do that is to improve topic saliency using Google's NLP API. They have a version you can use for free, which I use for this presentation. It's actually fairly reasonably priced for an API if you want to try to build a tool with it. And examine the SERP to the degree that you can in your content areas and in your targets markets to better not just understand, but meet search intent. Create expert content and then promote your experts online. Your experts are now part of your brand. You know who does a great job of that? Moz. You guys heard of Dr. Pete? Yeah, me too, he's great. And you go back into section 2 of the QR guidelines and conduct a simple reputation audit. I do this once a quarter. It's a really easy way to get out of things like domain authority and things like equity passing and non-equity passing and these like solely input-focused views. What's actually on the internet about your company that somebody can find, and how can you make that better? And then please, if you have one takeaway from my talk today, stop fighting about this stuff online. It's so boring. Just do your jobs. That's it. That's my talk. If you want to get my slides, they're right here. Upbuild is also hiring for a senior marketing strategist. The whole team is here. If you see one of these awesome nerds around, say hi. Thanks a lot, you guys.